One of my favourite releases that the Digimon franchise got outside of Japan would have to be the amazing timepieces that are the Digimon magazines. Now, before I get into anything, this video isn't sponsored by anyone, but a quick mention that if you have any of the issues that I'm missing, please hit me up, as the collection of Digimon magazines is kind of my main collection focus at the moment, since I've got basically all of the virtual pets that I could ever want, excluding new releases obviously. I've shifted my focus onto Digimon magazines and the Digimon figures, as in the minifigs, which I've done videos on in the past. So yeah, if you have any of these, specifically the Australian releases, hit me up. I'd be very appreciative, because I love these magazines so much, and I would really like to produce more content about them, because I feel like there's some hidden gems within these magazines. So with that out of the way, my little self-sponsored ad read just there, I thought I'll go on starting with the US releases of these comic books, and they are more or less comic books in the US release. So they were published by Dark Horse, and they kind of just read just straight front to back as comic books. There weren't any activities or news posts or anything about the franchise other than just the comics themselves that you would read. So they would just read like your run-of-the-mill comic books that Dark Horse would publish. So the Dark Horse releases only covered the first arc of Digimon Adventure, so that's the start of Adventure to the end of the Devimon arc, and then that's where the story ends in the US releases. And as far as I'm aware, other than the manhwa, which I'll mention later on, none of the other seasons of Digimon got this comic book treatment. So, poor US for not getting the rest. Then there's what the UK, various European languages, and of course Australia and New Zealand got, and that is what started with the comics from the Dark Horse publication of Digimon, but continued on to 02, Tamers, and in some European releases, Frontier. Now, I've seen pictures of this in, I believe, German and French, I think, but I haven't ever actually seen a copy of the Digimon magazine covering Frontier for either the UK or the Australian releases. I could be wrong here, it's just what I've seen. Seems to be season 1, 2, and 3 in the English language releases. But I could be wrong. It could have just been a very limited release, or just a release that nobody thought to keep around in the year 2023, which is more or less 2 decades after the original run. So, in terms of differences between these releases and the Dark Horse publication of the Digimon magazine, is that there were activities, there was news about the franchise, upcoming video games, anime, movies, various pieces of merchandise that you could buy at the time. There was news about those releases, and it wasn't just the comics. They also had a portion where readers could submit fan art and various photos of their collections in, and if they did that and they got published, they would be sent, like, I don't know, an Agumon figure or whatever new merchandise was out at the time. So that was something that was pretty cool. It was more than just the comic book, it was a magazine as well. So the Australian release was called Digimon Mag Comic Book, which is a very lengthy search term. When you're trying to hunt these down, you kind of find yourself having to search for Digimon Book, Digimon Magazine, Digimon Mag, Digimon Comic. So you kind of have to go through a few search terms, because it's just word SEO soup at that point, which is kind of funny. I believe the UK version is just called the Digimon Magazine, which is much better to search for that. So that is something, and I'm not sure what the European languages ones. I believe in Europe and the UK it was published by Panini Press, who were known for like stickers and cards, I guess, from around that time. But in Australia it was published by Otter Press, who also released the Simpsons comic book and magazine that we had at the time. So Otter Press was like this huge publication company for these magazines, and that's who did the Digimon magazine in Australia. So that was pretty cool. In terms of the story for 02 and Tamers, not sure about Frontier. I can't speak for Frontier because I haven't read any of the comic books that covered Frontier. But in terms of 02 and Tamers, they seem to kind of adapt and change a few things from the anime itself. It's not abridged like the manhwa. It is also, feel free to call me out if I'm mispronouncing manhwa. I've only just read it. I've never actually heard the word. So, and by manhwa, I mean non-Japanese Asian comics. I believe specifically Chinese, but I'm not 100%. So if I'm mispronouncing that, please call me out because I've never heard the word. I've only read it. And it's manhua, so please call me out. So in any case, it wasn't abridged like those comic books, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but they would change a few things. So they might start off the same, but they'd go in different routes. For example, Ken is actually working alongside Arukenimon and Mummymon, and then kind of does a face turn and decides that he wants to protect them. They kind of merge together the arcs. In terms of something that I've covered in a previous video about these comic books is that these releases in these comic books also conclude the Dark Ocean arc. They actually kind of shove it in with the Demon Corps arc, so Daigomon is actually foreshadowing the Demon Corps member, which is Marine Devimon. They're actually working together, so when Marine Devimon attacks, Daigomon is there too. Tailmon evolves to Holydramon to protect Hikari, or Kari rather, because English names, I use them, I will use like a mix of them, and it'll upset everyone. It'll upset the dub fans, it'll upset the English sub fans, I apologise for that. It's what happens when you consume every piece of Digimon merchandise and media in the languages that you speak. My apologies. So, anyway, so we have Holydramon / Magnadramon evolve for Hikari / Kari and defeat Daigomon, and that's kind of the conclusion of the Dark Ocean arc, and then later on they're able to defeat Marine Devimon, further being a conclusion to the Dark Ocean arc. The Dark Ocean arc, which kind of did, in the anime, bleed into the Demon Corps arc. That's just where Demon was sent to, but otherwise it wasn't really mentioned other than that. So that was nice that they actually kind of continued to address that in the comic book itself. I don't have all of the Tamers issues, but Ryo's story is explained a little bit more in those, and that was also released in Wicked, which again, I've also covered that in a previous video as well. Wicked being the Fox Kids magazine, and it had the same art as the comic, because it was in the comic as well. So that is something that I get asked a lot about these magazines, is it abridged? And the answer is no, it kind of splits off into its own story that is similar, but different, which I do appreciate. It's not just like the same story, but cut down, missing out on a few things. Which brings me to the manhwa. So these were released for 1, 2, 3, and 4, and funnily enough, they were labelled as 02, 03, and 04. Further stressing my pet peeve that there is no series called Digimon Adventure 01, but the manhwa releases kind of hurt me in that regard because they call all the seasons what season it is with a 0 in the front because 02 exists. So that's something. So the Digimon Frontier manhwa is called Digimon Frontier or Digimon 04. So that's a thing. So these, as I mentioned, were abridged versions of the anime releases. However, I only have the Frontier release. I'm not sure if the Adventure and Tamers and 02 releases were in Australia. I just know that the Frontier ones were. And I only have 2 out of the 3 Frontier releases. So I'm not even actually sure if the 3rd volume was released in Australia because I've never seen it. I know it was released overseas in Asia. And fun fact, it's a publication company that was very, very well known at the time. They published Evangelion and Fruits Basket in Australia for the early volumes, and then they disappeared. So that's a Singaporean publication company. So we had the same issues as Singapore. So in any case, it's abridged in a kind of funny way. So the Frontier releases cut out bits such as Zoe getting her spirit. She just shows up and she says, "Hey, I got my spirit when I went to the Wind Village." But then the funny thing is, the next page, she loses her spirit. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. It is like you flip over the page and then she's lost her spirit. Something else that's kind of funny about this release is that the translation team simply do not care. They call characters the wrong name. We have Sorcerymon being called Shamanmon, Seraphimon is continuously called Ophanimon, Grottomon is misspelled as Grottemon, but Gotsumon also gets called Grottemon a few points, so that's kind of funny. Spirit Evolution is now called Spirit Revolution, which sounds much cooler in my opinion. So there's a few of those weird kind of translation issues and just characters being called the wrong thing. There's also the fact that there's a mix of being called an English name and being called a Japanese name. Junpei is called JP and Junpei, which isn't too bad, but other characters will have their English name as their human child self, but their Digimon self will have their Japanese name. So we have things like Zoe and Fairymon, rather than Zoe and Kazemon or Izumi and Fairymon. That is something that is just kind of funny about the translation here. Again, I'm not sure about the Adventure 02 and Tamers releases, but I have heard that they are also abridged into fitting into like 3 volumes instead of being kind of longer, I guess. And then, of course, I think it'd be amiss not to reference the non-official magazines that came out around this time, and I'm not sure if we got these in Australia. I've only seen one online in Australia, which I promptly bought because it was very funny, and it's kind of something I've wanted for a long time. And these are obviously the Beckett Collectors, more specifically, the Beckett Digimon Collectors. So these were unofficial magazines that featured news about the franchise and its upcoming releases, kind of like we saw in the Australian and UK magazines, but these were just unofficial ones without comics, just a bunch of unofficial and official art and news about releases. It also featured art by Ken Penders. Yeah, that Ken Penders. So that is cool and fun. There is a common rumour that all the art is from Ken Penders in the Beckett Collectors. That's not true. There's art from other artists. Ken Penders is just the main one, and the one you probably heard of, because if you're chronically online like I am, you probably know who Ken Penders is, or if you know Sonic the Hedgehog, or any art about that. And of course, there are the Mad magazines and similar parody magazines around at the time. Basically, they had a few cracks at the franchise, and that was kind of like the cool thing at the time. So we had the Mad magazines, and then my dog has just entered the room, and you can hear him because he's wearing a cone. Hello, Mr. Langley. So there's also the K-Zone magazine, which stands for Kids Zone, which is currently actually still running at the moment, obviously without Digimon news, because it's aimed at kids nowadays. So it has like, I don't know, what are the kids like? Bluey? Paw Patrol? I don't know what kids like. SpongeBob's still on? I don't know. I don't know what kids like, but whatever kids like today is now in K-Zone issues that are out at the moment. So in these K-Zone issues, we had like news about the anime, news about merchandise, anything about Digimon. It was often had Digimon on the cover because that was kind of like the new thing, especially in the early 2000s. So in any case, those are all the bits of trivia and knowledge I have about the Digimon magazines. Again, huge fan of them. Still trying to collect them all. I'm still missing quite a few issues from the Australian release. I keep on missing them, being like really bad timing in terms of some of these releases. So please hit me up if you have any of the issues that I'm missing. I've mentioned it before about which issues I'm missing. I think it's like 8, 16, and like 25 onwards off the top of my head, but I have to find the place where I've written that down about what issues I'm missing. So in any case, let me know your thoughts, comments, questions about the magazines in the comment section below. Of course, I would love to cover more about the Digimon magazines and their releases. That's one of the reasons why I'm collecting them, because there's some kind of funny stuff that's in them. So like this video for my ever-going plight, I think is probably the best word there. And definitely subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell or whatever I'm meant to say. And of course, if you have subscribed, tell your friends, tell your families, tell your neighbours. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!